They called it the ghost table. Not because the food was cold by the time it arrived, it never was. Not because the service was slow, it never dared to be. They called it the ghost table because the man who sat there could make you disappear from this city without raising his voice or lifting a finger. Every Friday at 9 p.m., something invisible shifted inside the Bamsane lounge. The ambient jazz thinned. The clink of crystal grew careful. The waitstaff at Seoul's most exclusive Cheongdam-dong restaurant developed a collective, silent instinct: drift toward the kitchen, find a task that required your full attention somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't the secluded corner booth in the back. Nobody wanted to serve Eun Son. Nobody except her. They thought she was reckless. Desperate. A foreign woman with no understanding of what his name meant in this city, what the scorpion coiling up his neck meant, what happened to people who looked him in the eye too long. They were wrong. She wasn't reckless. She was the only one in the building who was truly free, because she had already lost everything that mattered before she ever walked through those doors. And a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature in any room. This isn't a love story. This isn't a rescue story either. This is how Shirley Harold walked into the devil's house, looked him dead in the eyes, and ended up running his empire. Seoul doesn't forgive you for being broke. It just dresses up the indifference in neon and makes it beautiful from a distance. Inside the Bamsane lounge, the air smelled of imported oak, aged whiskey, and the specific kind of tension that only exists when powerful men are in close proximity to each other. It was a Friday, 8:52 p.m., and the dining room was performing its usual theater, politicians murmuring over braised short rib, corporate heirs nursing scotch they couldn't actually taste, a pair of entertainment lawyers pretending not to notice the camera crew at table 6. But the hush was already spreading. Starting near the entrance. Moving inward like weather. Shirley Harold felt it before she heard it. She was balancing a full tray of empty glassware near the service corridor, her third trip in the last 20 minutes, her feet registering a complaint her brain had long since stopped acknowledging. She was 28 years old with the kind of under-eye shadows that don't respond to sleep, only to the elimination of the problem causing them. Her curly hair was pulled back tight in a ponytail that had been redone twice since her double shift started at noon. Her white button-down was crisp in the way that takes specific, deliberate effort when you're running yourself into the ground. The red apron tied at her waist was the only color she was wearing and, tonight, it felt like a target. Harold. The floor manager appeared at her elbow. J1. A compact, meticulous man who had run this room for 11 years without once raising his voice, until tonight. His voice was barely above a breath. His forehead was doing something complicated. Table 4 needs clearing, and I need you on the ghost table. Now. Shirley didn't look up from the glassware. It's Park's section on Fridays. Park is locked in the dry storage room. I don't think she's coming out. Shirley paused. She set the tray down slowly. J1. I know. You know I have medical bills. I know. Which means I need this job. Which is exactly why I'm asking you and not anyone else. He exhaled through his nose. You are the only person on this floor who has ever poured his water without shaking. I'll give you the full service gratuity. His table, full share. Shirley looked toward the secluded corner booth. Leather. Low light. Set with the kind of precision that meant someone had measured the distance between the fork and the knife. Currently empty, but not for long. She thought about the stack of envelopes on the floor of her Goshawan room in Silumdong. Her mother's name printed on every one of them, in that particular bureaucratic font that hospitals use when they're done being gentle about money. Fine, she said. But if he doesn't like the steak, that's between him and the chef. At 9 p.m., the heavy lacquered doors at the entrance swung open. 2 men entered first, broad, silent, wearing dark suits that fit the way armor fits. Their eyes moved across the room in slow, professional sweeps, cataloging exits, logging faces. Then they stepped aside. Eun Son was not what the rumors built. The rumors built a monster, thick-necked, loud, wearing his violence like cologne. What walked through the door of the Bamsane lounge was something quieter and, because of that, considerably worse. He was in his mid-30s, lean without being slight, dressed in a black suit with no tie and no flourish. His face was angular, composed, and shaved clean. The scorpion tattoo began at the base of his jaw and wound up the left side of his neck with the patient, unhurried quality of something that had claimed that territory long ago. Ink spread across both hands, patterns too deliberate to be decorative. A watch at his wrist caught the light once and then disappeared back into shadow. He didn't survey the room. He didn't need to. The room had already organized itself around his presence before he reached the table. Shirley picked up the water pitcher, squared her shoulders once, a private ritual, over in half a second, and walked toward the corner booth. He was reading the menu when she arrived. He didn't look up. In Shirley's experience, men like this never looked up at the staff. To them, service was ambient. Part of the architecture. "Good evening," she said. Her voice came out exactly as she intended, even, professional, not a single unnecessary inflection. "Sparkling or still?" The menu stopped moving. The pause lasted 2 full seconds, which, in a room this quiet, was considerable. Eun Son raised his head. Whatever he was expecting, it wasn't this. Wasn't the steadiness of her posture or the complete absence of theater in her expression. His eyes, dark, measuring, used to finding the seam in people where the fear lived, moved across her face and found no seam to exploit. "Still," he said. His voice was low. The kind of low that didn't need volume because the room was already listening. "Room temperature." "We're out of the Jeju spring water," Shirley said. It wasn't entirely a lie, the case was in the back, and she had 2 other tables waiting. "I have the Icelandic, or I can put in an order to the cellar." 10 minutes. Across the room, Jae-won visibly stopped breathing. "You did not tell Eun Son you were out of something. You did not offer him a wait time. You offered him solutions before he knew there was a problem." The silence at the ghost table stretched. One of the guards by the bar shifted his weight. Shirley didn't move. Then, almost imperceptibly, something in Eun Son's expression adjusted. Not softness. Not exactly. More like the recalibration of an instrument encountering unexpected resistance. "Icelandic," he said. Shirley nodded. She turned to go. "You've been working this section before." It wasn't a question. His voice followed her, quiet and precise. She turned back halfway. 6 months, she confirmed. "You just never looked up." One of the guards took a step forward. Eun Son raised 2 fingers, barely, and the guard stopped. He studied her for a moment with the detached curiosity of someone unaccustomed to being surprised. "What is your name?" "Shirley." "Just for the purpose of bringing you dinner." "Shirley." He repeated it once, the way you test the weight of something unfamiliar. "Don't bring me the imported steak. Tell the kitchen I want the local hanwoo. Whatever the chef actually recommends." Shirley looked at him for 1 beat longer than was strictly professional. "Good choice," she said. She didn't bow. She walked away. She didn't know it then, couldn't have known, but in the language of this particular underworld, the way she left that table was the equivalent of a declaration. She had looked at the most dangerous man in Seoul and found him, if not ordinary, then at least legible. Something in him registered that. Filed it somewhere. And the wall Eun Son had built, stone by stone, year by year, had its very first crack. And just like that, something shifted. If you're already hooked on this story, take 1 second and hit the like button, it really helps this channel grow. And if you love cinematic mafia drama like this, make sure you subscribe because what's coming next changes everything. Also, I'm curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your country right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And seriously, thank you for taking your time to watch this. Let's keep going. 3 weeks later, she would save his life. And nothing, for either of them, would ever be the same. 3 weeks after the ghost table cracked, Shirley had developed a routine. She knew how Eun Son took his water. She knew he would dismiss the menu after 30 seconds and order whatever the kitchen was proudest of that evening. She knew his guards preferred the bar stools nearest the mirror, and that the shorter one relaxed slightly when she brought the bread basket without being asked. She hadn't decided whether knowing these things was useful or dangerous. Probably both. It was a Friday, always a Friday, and the Bamsane lounge was running at full capacity. Every table occupied, every server moving at the specific pace that exists between controlled and chaotic. Shirley was on her 6th hour of a double shift, carrying the particular exhaustion that lives behind your eyes and makes light feel aggressive. She had cleared table 11, reset table 3, and was balancing a tray of cocktails for the party near the entrance when Eun Son arrived at 9. Same time. Same booth. Same absolute gravitational silence spreading outward from the corner. She delivered the cocktails, took his order, Hanwoo again, the scotch neat, no questions, and kept moving. This was the job. This was the routine. She was halfway back to the service corridor when the doors came off their hinges. Not literally. But it felt that way, the concussive force of 4 men entering a room with that specific quality of controlled violence that civilian spaces aren't built to contain. Shirley knew something was wrong before she registered the weapons. It was the way every head in the room turned at exactly the same moment. The way the music didn't dim this time, it just stopped. Someone screamed. Then everyone was moving at once, chairs scraping, glass hitting the floor, bodies folding under tables with the graceless urgency of survival. The Biko men moved through the chaos like they had memorized the room. One of them raised his arm toward the corner booth with the casual certainty of a man who had already decided how this ended. Eun Son's guards were 3 seconds from their weapons. 3 seconds was 3 seconds too long. Shirley didn't think. That's the only honest way to describe it. The thinking came later, in the dark of her Gashawon, shaking. In the moment, there was no thought. There was only the sight of the barrel leveling, the distance between her and the table, and something that overrode every reasonable instinct she possessed. She screamed, raw, wordless, and lunged. Her hands hit Eun Son's chest and she shoved with everything she had. The wine glass and his tumbler of scotch exploded between them, mid-air, as they went backward into the leather booth. Red liquid scattered in every direction, catching the candlelight, suspended for one impossible second, like shattered rubies thrown against the dark. The bullets tore through the booth exactly where his head had been. Gunfire erupted from the bar. Return fire. The room became a completely different kind of place. Shirley was pinned beneath Eun Son's weight, her ears ringing, something wet soaking through her white button-down. Red wine or blood, she couldn't tell yet and didn't have the luxury of checking. His hand came down hard over her head, pressing her flat against the seat. Around them, the Bamsane lounge burned. Above her, Eun Son was very still. And very alive. The gunfire stopped the way storms stop, not gradually, but all at once, leaving a silence that felt structurally unsound. Sirens. Distant, then closing. Shirley was still processing the ringing in her ears when the weight lifted off her. She pushed herself upright, glass crunching beneath her palms, and took inventory, both hands functional, a cut somewhere above her left elbow, red wine soaked through to her skin. The lounge was devastated, overturned tables, shattered bottles, a chandelier swinging on a damaged mount. 2 of the Biko men were down. The others had dissolved into the street. Eun Son was already standing. He straightened his jacket. Checked his cuffs. And then he turned to her, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen on him before, not the cool detachment of the ghost table, not the faint recalibration she'd earned that first night. This was something deliberate. Something constructed. He grabbed her arm. Not gently. You. His voice cut through the settling chaos, loud enough to carry to the surviving staff pressed against the far wall, loud enough for the first uniformed officers pushing through the ruined entrance. Who gave you permission to touch me? Shirley went completely still. You think that was heroic? He pulled her forward, and the room, what was left of it, watched. You caused a scene. You panicked. You're a liability. He turned to J1, who had gone the color of old ash. She's done. Tonight. And if I find out she's working anywhere in this district by next week, that becomes your problem. The officers were close now. Taking in the wreckage. Taking in her face. Eun Son released her arm and straightened his jacket a second time. Then he walked past her without another glance, the way you walk past furniture. The next 72 hours dismantled her life with quiet efficiency. The Uido Hotel didn't call back. Neither did the restaurant in Mapo, or the hotel bar near Hongdae where she'd applied the morning after. By the second day, a hiring manager in Itaewon answered her call just long enough to say her name once, Shirley Harold, and then hang up. By the third day, she stopped calling. The Goshawan room in Sillimdong was 4 walls, a narrow bed, and a shelf. It had seemed temporary when she moved in 8 months ago. Now it felt like a verdict. She sat on the edge of the mattress with the Chicago envelope spread across her lap. Her mother's name, printed in that particular hospital font that doesn't soften anything. Past due. Past due. Final notice. No money. No job. No return flight she could afford. The cut on her arm pulled when she moved. She had shoved a man out of the path of a bullet, and he had responded by erasing her. Shirley stared at the wall for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and started figuring out where Eun Son lived. She had a speech prepared. 14 sentences. She had written them out longhand on the back of a past-due envelope, revised twice, and committed them to memory during the 40-minute subway ride she was planning to take to Cheongdam-dong. She was going to find him. She was going to stand in front of him and say every word clearly, without flinching, and then she was going to make him fix what he had broken. The Genesis G90 pulled up to her building at 7 a.m. Black. Tinted. Absolutely silent in the way that only very expensive things are silent. It idled at the curb like it had always belonged there and was simply waiting for her to acknowledge that fact. 2 men got out. She recognized the shorter one from the bar at Bamsane. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply held the rear door open and looked at her with the patient, immovable energy of someone who had done this before and had never once been refused. Shirley looked at the car. She looked at the envelope in her hand. She got in. Eun Son was seated behind the privacy panel, jacket on, hands rested loosely in his lap. No drink. No phone. He had the air of a man who had been waiting and had decided in advance not to make that anyone else's problem. He looked at her once, the cut on her arm, the shadows under her eyes, the envelope she was still holding, and something in his jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. The Biko gang has a protocol, he said. No preamble. When a civilian interferes with an operation, they identify the face. They use them. He paused. They would have taken you within a week. Not to punish you. To get to me. Shirley said nothing. If you still had the job, you were findable. If you still had the routine, you were predictable. His voice was even, precise, and carried the specific weight of someone who had calculated the cost of every available option before choosing the least terrible one. I made you unemployable so I could make you invisible. I had 4 days to do it before they started looking. The city moved past the tinted glass. You could have told me, she said. You would have run. She wanted to argue that. She didn't, because he wasn't wrong. The Pyeongchangdong estate materialized out of the mountain like it had grown there, stone walls, tiered levels, security infrastructure woven so naturally into the landscaping that you had to know what you were looking for to see it. Inside, he laid it out without theater, full salary, every medical bill cleared within 30 days, absolute protection for her and her family in Chicago. Her title, estate manager. Her actual function, to bring order to a fortress that had none. He slid a single document across the table. Shirley looked at it. Looked at the envelope in her hand. Thought about her mother's name in that hospital font. She picked up the pen. "I run the staff my way," she said. "No interference." Eun Son almost smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less." She gave herself 1 day to absorb it. The estate was vast, stone corridors, tiered courtyards, a traditional Hanok annex sitting against the mountain's tree line like a quiet contradiction to the reinforced gates and armed perimeter. Her quarters were larger than any room she'd occupied in Seoul. She sat in them for exactly 1 evening, ordered her thoughts the way she used to organize a restaurant floor before opening, and then got to work. By the end of day 2, she had fired 3 people. The head housekeeper had been skimming supply invoices for months, the math wasn't even subtle. A kitchen attendant was running food out the back entrance on a schedule too regular to be accidental. The overnight laundry contractor had never once been inside the estate but had been signing completion logs for 11 weeks straight. She left the termination paperwork on Eun Son's desk without comment. He signed all 3 without asking a single question. That was the beginning of a mutual understanding. The guards were harder. They were professional, disciplined, and almost universally convinced that a woman with a hospitality background and a red apron had no business telling them anything about anything. The first time Shirley flagged a blind spot in the east courtyard camera coverage, the shift supervisor listened with the specific patience of a man waiting for her to finish so he could ignore her. She walked him to the courtyard. She stood in the blind spot. She held up a hand and made him acknowledge, out loud, that not a single camera in the array could see where she was standing. He reassigned the coverage that afternoon. After that, they listened. Not warmly, but they listened. The security shift logs were Shirley's idea. She had implemented rotation audits at 2 different hotel properties in Chicago, and the logic translated cleanly: if you know who is where and when, you know immediately when something is wrong. What she found, 3 weeks into the system, was that something had been wrong for a while. Guard rotations on the northeast perimeter were being altered after sign-off, small adjustments, 20-minute windows, the kind of changes that looked like scheduling errors if you weren't looking for a pattern. But Shirley had spent years looking for patterns in systems that people assumed were too complicated for outsiders to read. She wrote it down and said nothing. Not yet. He found her in the kitchen at midnight on a Thursday, the shift log spread across the island counter, a cold cup of tea at her elbow. He didn't ask what she was doing. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the opposite counter, and they stayed like that in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only develops between people who have stopped performing for each other. "Your mother," he said eventually. "Is she improving?" Shirley looked up. "The last payment cleared. She starts the new treatment next week." He nodded once. No flourish. She looked at him, really looked, at the weight he carried in his shoulders even when he was standing still, the particular loneliness of a man whose name emptied every room he entered. "Does it ever get quiet?" she asked. "In your head? Does it ever stop?" He considered that with the seriousness it deserved. "Not since I was 19, he said. Shirley picked up her pen and went back to the logs. But something between them had shifted, quiet and irrevocable, like a door opening in a room neither of them had admitted existed. The alarms came at 2:14 a.m. Not the gradual awareness of something being wrong, the full, immediate detonation of it. Shirley was upright before she was fully awake, her body making decisions her mind was still catching up to. Gunfire at the main gates. Sustained, organized, close enough to vibrate through the stone walls. Her door opened before she reached it. Two guards, weapons drawn, moving with the rehearsed efficiency of men who had drilled this scenario. Estate manager. With us. Now. The panic room was deep inside the estate's lower level, reinforced steel behind a panel in the library, climate-controlled, stocked, built to sustain 2 occupants for 72 hours. The kind of room that communicated, without ambiguity, that whoever designed this fortress had imagined its worst day in precise detail. Eun Son was in the corridor when they passed him, jacket off, issuing instructions to his security lead in rapid, clipped Korean. He caught her eye for exactly 1 second. Stay inside until I come for you personally. Not a request. Do you understand? I understand, she said. The panel sealed behind her with a sound like a held breath finally released. The room had a monitor. 4 quadrants, gate cameras, east courtyard, the Hanok Annex, the main drive. The gate feed was chaos, muzzle flash, vehicles, Biko men pressing the perimeter in coordinated waves. Eun Son's guards were holding, but barely. Shirley watched for 4 minutes. Then she stopped watching the gate and started thinking about the logs. 20-minute windows. Northeast perimeter. Alterations made after sign-off, on a rotation that nobody was supposed to notice. She had written it down and said nothing because she hadn't known yet what she was looking at. She knew now. The gate attack was loud. Deliberate. The kind of assault designed to pull every available body toward a single point, to empty the interior of the estate and leave its center undefended. It wasn't a raid. It was a direction. She was out of the panic room in under a minute, moving through the darkened corridor with her back to the wall and the estate's layout mapped in her memory from 6 weeks of walking every inch of it. The gunfire at the gates was distant now, muffled by stone and distance. The interior halls were silent. Almost. The emergency ventilation panel for the lower level was housed in the northeast annex. She had noted it during her first infrastructure audit. It controlled airflow to the panic room specifically, a detail she had found reassuring at the time. She smelled the canister before she saw it. Min-jun had his back to her. Eun Son's second-in-command. His childhood friend. The man who sat at his right hand at every meeting Shirley had been permitted to observe. He was working with focused, unhurried precision, coupling a matte gray canister to the ventilation intake with the calm of a man who had planned this moment for a long time. Carbon monoxide. Colorless. Patient. Untraceable in the chaos of a firefight. Shirley stood in the dark of the annex doorway and understood, with complete and terrible clarity, exactly what she was looking at. She turned back toward the kitchen. She needed something heavy. The dulcet was on the lowest shelf, exactly where she had reorganized the kitchen stores 5 weeks ago. Heavy granite, wide-mouthed, used for the stone bowl rice the kitchen staff made on Sunday mornings. She lifted it with both hands and felt the weight of it settle into her grip like a decision that had already been made. She moved back through the corridor without her shoes. Min-jun didn't hear her coming. That was the first advantage. The polished wooden floors of the Hanok Annex were her floors now. She knew which boards carried sound and which ones didn't. She had learned this estate the way she had learned every property she'd ever managed, methodically, completely, on the assumption that detailed knowledge was the only currency that never depreciated. She came in low and swung hard. The dulcet connected with Min-jun's hand against the control panel with a crack that she felt up both arms. He screamed, short, bitten off, and the coupling wrenched free from the intake valve. The canister dropped, hissing, rolling sideways across the floor. Shirley kicked it toward the exterior wall and put herself between it and the panel. Min-jun straightened up. In the dim annex light, with his broken hand pulled against his chest and his composure stripped completely away, he looked like a different person. The trusted second-in-command, the childhood friend, the man who poured tea at strategy meetings, gone. What was underneath was something older and considerably uglier. He pulled the knife left-handed. What followed was not a fight in any cinematic sense. It was desperate and graceless and very fast, Min-jun slashing to create distance, Shirley using the dulcet's weight to keep him off the panel, both of them moving across the polished floor with the frantic, specific logic of survival. He was stronger. She was angrier and had better footing. The blade caught her forearm, a clean, shallow cut that burned like a brand. She didn't stop moving. She was positioning him away from the panel, away from the canister, keeping him turned toward the interior wall when the annex door came open. Eun Son took in the room in 1 second. The sabotaged panel. The canister against the wall, still faintly hissing. Shirley, bleeding, planted between Min-jun and the ventilation intake. Min-jun, knife out, breathing hard. The silence was absolute. She attacked me. Min-jun's voice found its footing quickly, smooth, aggrieved, reaching for the register of a man wrongly accused. She's been acting erratically for weeks. I came to check the panel and she. Eun Son looked at the coupling on the floor. At the canister. At the specific configuration of components that only assembled one way and only for one purpose. He looked at Shirley's arm. He raised the gun and fired once. The sound of it left no room for anything else. Afterward, he found a clean cloth in the kitchen and folded it against her forearm without speaking. She let him. His hands were steady in the way of someone who had learned long ago to keep them that way regardless of what was happening behind his eyes. The logs, she said quietly. I should have told you sooner. Yes. He didn't soften it. But he didn't move away either. She looked at the side of his face, the scorpion at his jaw, the weight he carried even now, even here, in the wreckage of a betrayal that went back further than she could fully comprehend. He had just executed the person who knew him longest. And the person sitting beside him, pressing a cloth to her arm, was a woman he had known for less than 2 months. He tied off the bandage with the same precision he applied to everything. Get some rest, he said. Then, quieter, thank you, Shirley. It was the first time he had used her name without it being a question. The request arrived through the appropriate channels, which was itself suspicious. The Biko Syndicate had never used appropriate channels for anything. They were not, historically, an organization that sent formal correspondence and proposed neutral venues. And yet, the message came through a legitimate intermediary, correctly formatted, requesting a high-level parley at the 118th floor observation deck of the Lotte World Tower. Neutral ground. No weapons. Third-party security monitoring the entrance. Eun Son read it twice, set it down, and said nothing for a long moment. It's a trap, Shirley said. She was standing across the desk, arms folded, the bandage on her forearm still visible below her rolled sleeve. Obviously. And you're going anyway. If I don't appear, I signal weakness to every other syndicate watching this war. He looked up. In this world, perception is infrastructure. I cannot afford to let it erode. Shirley was quiet for a moment, turning it over. Then I'm going with you. He refused twice. She outlasted both refusals with the same calm, methodical patience she had applied to the estate's corrupt invoice system, simply continuing to present the logic until it became undeniable. They know your face, she said. They know your guards' faces. They do not know mine, not in a different context, not out of a red apron, not moving through a catering crew with a champagne tray. She held his gaze. I am the only person you have who can move through that room completely undetected. You know I'm right. The third silence lasted considerably longer than the first two. You stay on the perimeter, he said finally. You observe. You do not engage unless there is no other option. Agreed. He looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize, the one that wasn't quite trust and wasn't quite something else, occupying the precise territory between them that neither had named. Don't make me regret this, he said. You won't, she said. And she meant it. The 118th floor was everything the Biko Syndicate wanted it to be, elegant, exposed, and designed to make you feel the altitude. The observation deck had been reserved exclusively for the parley, fitted out with catering stations and a small crew of servers in matching dark uniforms. Shirley was indistinguishable from the rest of them within 4 minutes of arrival. She moved the way she had moved through 100 dining rooms, purposeful, peripheral, carrying the specific invisibility of competent service staff that powerful men never actually see. Champagne flute here, bottle exchange there, a quiet repositioning that brought her gradually closer to the Biko contingent without ever appearing to move toward anything in particular. The earpiece was barely visible beneath her hair. Northwest cluster, she murmured, tipping a bottle with practiced smoothness. 6 of them. The boss is center, gray suit, left hand bandaged. He hasn't touched his drink. Eun Son's voice came back low and even. Noted. Anything else? Shirley watched the Biko boss lean toward the man on his left and say something she couldn't catch, too quiet, and in a regional inflection she almost missed. Almost. Her eyes moved to the floor beneath Eun Son's designated chair. The glass panels caught the light differently there. Fractionally. The kind of difference you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for exactly that kind of thing. She was already looking. Eun Son, she said quietly, keeping her expression completely neutral as she moved to the next table. Don't sit down. The earpiece died mid-sentence. One moment Eun Son's voice was in her ear, steady, confirming her instruction, beginning to redirect, and then nothing. A flat, total silence that was worse than static because it was so deliberate. The jammer had activated with the clean efficiency of a plan entering its final phase. Across the room, the Biko boss set down his untouched glass. Shirley had 4 seconds, maybe 5, before the command he'd issued reached the man with the detonator. She could see it now with horrible clarity, the glass panels beneath Eun Son's chair, the fractional difference in how they caught the light, the microcharges threaded into the seams like stitching. A localized detonation. Surgical. Designed to open the floor beneath one specific person and leave everyone else with plausible shock. Eun Son was 3 steps from the chair and moving toward it. She left the champagne bottle on the nearest table and grabbed the cart. It was a full commercial service cart, steel frame, 3 tiers, 16 bottles of champagne nested in ice, the kind of weight that required 2 staff members to move properly through a crowd. Shirley moved it alone. She didn't sprint immediately, 2 steps of acceleration, using the cart's own mass, and then she was running, and the cart was running with her, and the elegant 118th floor observation deck of the Latte World Tower briefly became something entirely different from what it had been designed to be. The Biko guards registered her late. 1 full second of processing, server, cart, wrong direction, wrong speed, and then she hit them. The collision was catastrophic and loud. Steel and glass and ice and bodies, a cascade of shattering that swallowed the room whole. The Biko boss lurched backward. His hand went to his jacket. Shirley was already past him. She hit Eun Son at full momentum, both arms around his chest, driving him sideways off the glass panel with everything she had, and the detonation went off in the same instant, a sharp, percussive crack that punched up through the floor and turned the VIP section into open air. The glass gave way in a single catastrophic exhale. The Biko boss and 2 of his lieutenants, scrambling forward in the chaos, had no floor left to stand on. The sound they made going through it was something Shirley would not think about later, if she could help it. The estate was quiet when they returned. A different kind of quiet than before, not the held-breath quiet of a fortress anticipating violence, but something that felt, cautiously, like aftermath. Eun Son set a duffel bag on the desk in front of her. Beside it, a first-class ticket. Chicago. Open date. The Biko syndicate has no leadership left to reconstitute. His voice was even. Your debt is cleared. Your family is protected. You are free to go. Shirley looked at the bag. At the ticket. At the window behind him where the Pyeongchangdong mountain line cut dark shapes against the pre-dawn sky. She thought about the Gashawon room in Silundong. The envelopes on the floor. The 14 sentences she had written on the back of a past due bill, back when she still thought this was a problem she could solve with the right words delivered to the right person. She pushed the ticket back across the desk. "I didn't come this far to go back to serving tables," she said. "I've cleared your invoices, managed your estate, decoded your security breach, and pulled you off a rigged floor, twice." She held his gaze. "I don't want a payout. I want a seat." Eun Son looked at her for a long moment, the full, unhurried assessment he had given her that very first night at the ghost table, except that now he knew exactly who he was looking at. He stepped aside. The gesture was small and unambiguous, the head of the table, open, waiting. Shirley Harold sat down. And the throne, at last, fit perfectly. And that is how Shirley Harold walked into the devil's house, and ended up ruling it. If you made it all the way to the end, I genuinely want to say thank you. Your time means something, and I appreciate you choosing to spend it here. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends, especially if you want more powerful mafia drama like this. And before you go, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it in your country right now? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Until next time, stay sharp.